You mentioned earlier that sometimes what gets in the way for people is we're scared, and also we don't understand our own power. I heard that at one point in your life growing up that you were called the class dummy. Now, obviously that's not true, but it sounded like it had a significant impact on you. What was happening for you at that time, and what did that help you learn?
Well, when I was, actually before I started school, I thought life was perfect because I was just running around with my parents helping with what they were doing and so on and so forth. But when I started school, I couldn't read. I couldn't, the figures, nothing stayed still on a page. And so, and we didn't know about dyslexia. That was not a term that was identified who people like me were. But so I was the class dummy. I flunked first grade and I had to repeat first grade. And the teacher called me the dummy. I had this deep soul wounding when I was in starting school. At school, I just hated it. I was so afraid, I was so broken, I was so everything, until I started third grade. But my third grade teacher saw something in me that the other had not, and she appointed me class governor. And so I got to do things like take what we had done in our class and take it to the whole student body. I mean, I could talk and I could tell stories and I could do a lot of things like that, but I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't add, I couldn't subtract. I couldn't do school stuff. So, I didn't really find my voice so that I could depend on it until I was 93. But that was in a dream that I found that out. I was constantly rechecking what I had written or what I had said, having somebody check, say, is that okay? I was that damaged. But when I was 93, I had a dream that helped that.
And how do you stay motivated, Mike?
The motivation is to be able, the greatest excitement, the greatest thrills in life, in my opinion, are being able to help other people do what they need to do. It's the contribution that you can make is extremely rewarding to the giver. And I tried to do that with the organizations that I've founded, that I've helped found, which are a half a dozen or so. And I feel that I'm contributing to the welfare of these individuals or to this country, whatever you want to call it, but that I've resolved the questions that people have. Oh, what am I doing with my life? This is something I can do. I'm doing it right here. Why am I seeing you guys? Because you'll help publish the thoughts that I'm expressing, because they work. You're watching it. But to be able to help other people is the greatest possible gift to any person, no matter how miserable or old or whatever they are. To be able to help someone, that's a huge benefit.
Huge.
It's better than all kinds of money.
Before trying to save the world, you must first liberate yourself. To try to save the world without first liberating yourself is like carpeting the earth rather than wearing sandals.
And I've heard you touch a little bit on the importance of knowing the difference between what we want and what we're given. Why do you think that those two concepts are so important to understand?
I think that what we want and what we're given often serve two different gods. And again, in our modern age, which suffers from this modern psychological disease we call narcissism, we tend to think that, I think it's a distortion of our inalienable rights. We think we're entitled to happiness. We're entitled to get what we want. And there's nothing wrong with working for what we want. But I've discovered in my life, at least, that, and there are, let me just say, there are things we want that aren't frivolous, like I don't want my wife to die, but that I want a new car, well, that's not quite the same category. So I think that I found in my life that working for what I want has often turned out to be an apprenticeship for working with what I'm given, which is where my true gifts have always shown up. So again, not to say we shouldn't work for what we want. And there are some stories that speak to this. One, let me share one brief story, and this is about a professional cyclist, like a Tour de France cyclist, and he is preparing for a race. He's got the state-of-the-art equipment. He's shaved all the hair off his body so there's no resistance, and he's working his tail off. And the first stage of the race comes, and they're off. And after about a mile or two, it's out in the country, he is so far ahead in the beginning of all the other racers that as he crests over a hill, you can't even see the other racers. And as he's coasting speedily down this hill, as he reaches the bottom, out of nowhere, a great blue heron with its wings spread swoops over his handlebars. Well, it stuns him because the heron has opened something he's been chasing. So he stops. He actually, in the middle of the race, he straddles his bike. The other racers are catching up. Now we cut ahead, years ahead. And if you catch him behind his home, staring into the woods, and you ask him, what cost you the race? Once in a while, he'll say to you, I didn't lose the race, I left it. Now, someone can hear that story and say, oh, that's all very poetic. He actually lost. He didn't come in first. But I hold it differently. I think he trained to meet the heron, which changed his life. But if you told him he was training to meet a heron, he wouldn't have trained. So we often work toward what we can see and what's in view, often preparing for something we have no idea is waiting us, is ahead of us.
I've heard that you have a mantra, and I'm curious about this, that never give up. How have you used that mantra in your life?
Well, it started with my dad, and I remember being probably 9 years old, and I was doing something, and I said, oh, I give up. And he looks at me and he says, are you a quitter? And I thought, oh man, that's like being a liar. No, I'm not a quitter. And it's so important for us to understand what we teach our children. And these are things that were really brought to me so that I could understand the kind of life that I was going to actually live. And so, yeah, I had to make do. I had to let go. I had to. My mother taught me how to not take things in and say that was horrible. I hurt my feelings, and I could just let it go and say kuch balwane. It doesn't matter.
One of the things I've learned is that, of course, no one wants to fall down, but like gravity, we can't avoid it. And what I've discovered in my life is that if we back up enough, actually falling down and getting up is a rhythm. And actually over a lifetime, it's actually a dance. So as much as we don't like to fall down, what is the art of that dance? What are the skills? How do we help each other? In medieval times, medieval monks, when asked how they practiced their faith, said by falling down and getting up. And I learned that in other traditions, they're similar. In Japan, there's a proverb that says, fall down 7, get up 8. And it made me think quickly of, I'm 72, but in my 30s, I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And one part of that journey, I had a rib removed from my back, and I woke up afterwards and quite dislocated. And this kind but gruff nurse was right there in my face saying, "Okay, get up, we're gonna walk." I thought, who's gonna walk? And then she leaned closer and whispered softly, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Falling down, getting up. And as I researched the book, I ran across in the Hindu Upanishads, which are the anonymous sacred texts in the Hindu tradition, and they're just filled with amazing metaphors. And one of them I discovered is that of a caterpillar. And they say, how a caterpillar will bunch up and then move forward, and bunch up at 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And they use that image in the Upanishads to say this is the pace of spiritual growth. It's not a straight line.
And Mike, what's the hardest thing you've ever gone through in life?
Well, I was, when my wife died, my first wife, the mother of my 3 children, it was very difficult for me because I had a new business that I had founded and worked on, and 3 little kids to worry about. It was a difficult time, probably the worst time of my life. I think it's normal. And that actually helped me move into something active as a partial remedy of the stress that I was under. You can imagine what it is. You got all these things hanging on you, and I just decided to, because of the stress of raising a family, running a business, and without a wife, mother to my children. So I took up running over the dam at the lake with maybe one little kid holding on to a little finger of mine. We do that together. And I decided I liked running, and I began to get in an occasional race. And being small and lightweight, it was no problem. So I took it up, but nothing formal.
And did running help with your grief?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we also have a misunderstanding about questions in our culture. And so, in the outer world of circumstance, questions have an answer. What do we have to do to turn on this technology? You go down the grocery aisle, which items are cleaning items that you don't want to eat and which are food. So there are answers. But in the inner world and in the world of relationship, questions don't have answers. So yes, I think we have to ask questions. And one question that I often ask myself over the years, in personal inquiry and relational in working, is because often things seem complicated. Well, I try to always ask this question: is what's before me heartening and life-giving, or disheartening and life-draining? Even if it's difficult, if it's life-giving and heartening, then I'm in. But if what I'm looking at is disheartening and life-draining, what am I doing there? And that kind of barometer, emotional barometer, has always helped me, especially when things seem complicated. That kind of brings it back to very simple: is this life-giving or life-draining?
If I kind of think about some of the audience that watches our videos, 20-year-olds that would be feeling a lot of the emotions that you've described. They're excited about a life that's ahead of them, but they're scared. They may be holding on to scars that have come from some some part of their upbringing. What advice do you have for people who are about 20 years old right now?
Try to find joy and happiness. Find something that makes you laugh. Really laugh. Not something mean, but something that really makes you feel like, oh, that's really, really funny. And look for that kind of reality in your lives. And then spend time looking for what I call the light. You know, I kind of see myself walking along with a flashlight in the dark on my path, and it's dark, and I can just go as far as my flashlight takes me. But as I'm walking along, sometimes on the side of the path, there's a light that is not very bright. It's just kind of shimmering. If I shine my light over there, all of a sudden that light becomes great. In other words, as we reach out for each other, as we're walking along and we see someone else who's struggling, and we reach over just with whatever we have, you know, my mother's make do, whatever there is there, whatever the opportunity is, and you use it and you work forward with it, you're helping people in ways that you know not.